So our first class, when we looked at Caleb, there were 5 different, I wanted to look at what made him, how did he possess a different spirit? Another spirit, it says, but you can define it as a different spirit. What qualities within Caleb gave him this type of spirit? That was our goal 2 weeks ago, and we looked at a couple of them. The first one we looked at is that he was a different type of servant. We looked into the fact that his mother was from the tribe of Judah, but his father was a Kenizzite, a Gentile. And even from the beginning, I think Brother Chris brought this up, God was in subtle ways announcing his plans that the Gentiles would also be included in the promises. And we see that. So he was a little different from the other servants. And his name, if you remember, means dog. Remember? And you see that throughout the very few references made to Caleb that you can picture him as just this type of a dog-type attitude that nothing was going to get in his way in his fight for the truth and for what God wanted. So he was a little bit different. And we're going to find out today some of those other differences in Caleb. And this is the big one. I mean, every time I think of this, I get a little bit of chill because this should be applying to us too, and it does. He had a different vision than the other 10. He had the same vision as Joshua, but it was different than the other 10. And you remember the key phrase that I brought up last week. The 10 looked at the problems from their own abilities, right? They looked at it as the people are there are giants, they're too powerful, we can't do it. Whereas Caleb and Joshua looked at it from God's promises. God has promised to us that we will take this land. And you remember, he comes right out and he says, what are we waiting for? Go take it. Let's go. And picture that. He's talking with Joshua to the other 10 who are scared. And he's like, let's go. And we're going to look at that a little bit too, because it shows me something about a few things about Caleb. Differences with that type of attitude, that let's go get it attitude, not let's be afraid and sit here and whimper and cry. We looked at Proverbs 29, where there is no vision, the people perish. And then we looked at our vision, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. And that's where we left off. So we're going to pick up today, looking again, we're going to finish off the different type of vision, because as we all know, your vision has consequences, doesn't it? Whether it's choices you make daily or choices you make for your life, those choices have consequences. And we find that here in this study of Caleb, that their choices, their visions have consequences. Okay? So first we'll quickly look at the incorrect vision. And what that does is that generates an incorrect spirit, an incorrect walk with God. You're not putting your trust and faith in God. Your walk will be different than someone who does. So if you have your Bibles open, again, I'm going to be in chapter 14 a lot. And if you look at verse 10, okay, so the people have refused to listen to Caleb and Joshua. They failed, as Brother Chris and my dad brought up, they failed God's test of faith. The 10 had convinced the rest of the people this can't be done, and they had failed that test of faith. And that was a great point by both of you last time we met. And if we go to, well, let's go to verse 11. And really pay attention, because a lot of times when we read a lot of things, we read them. But let's put our minds and our hearts into God's shoes right now, what he must be feeling. And I tried to do that, and I hope it comes across here. But look at verse 11. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people provoke me? How long will it be ere they believe me for all the signs which I have showed among them? He's frustrated. He has to be, right? He's frustrated. He's angry. We know he's angry, but he's frustrated too. Just think of yourselves as parents with your children, the times that you were angry, but a lot of times that was more frustration. Boy, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, sometimes they just don't listen. And that's what God was going through. Think of that. The love he has for these people, the frustration he must have felt. We read about the anger, but the frustration, you have to read into it. And I think you get that reading that verse, the frustration he must have had with his people. Verse 12, he is the anger. I will smite them with the pestilence and disinherit them. And I will make thee a greater nation and mightier than they. He's ready to wipe them out. Start over. Shows you the frustration and anger he had with the people. And then Moses steps up. Okay, in verse 13, Moses says unto the Lord, then the Egyptians shall hear it, for thou broughtest this people in the might from among them. Now, you might read that and not think any significance of that verse at all. But if you remember back to the golden calf, brothers and sisters and friends, what did God say to Moses? And we won't look it up, but God told Moses to get down from the mountain, for thy people are doing horrible things. Not God's people, thy people, Moses. They're yours. Get down from this mountain and take care of this business. Moses is reminding God, it wasn't me who did this, brought these people up, it was you. It was you. All glory unto God. You did this. And if you wipe them out, the nations around us are going to say, there's no real God at all. He couldn't save his people. It's a subtle little thing, but if you remember the golden calf story, it makes sense why Moses would do that. It wasn't me, God. It was you. It's all you. I think it's just and Moses goes on through the 20th verse and really intercedes for the people. Verse 15, if thou shalt kill all this people as one man, then the nations which have heard the fame of thee will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land which he sware unto them, therefore he hath slain them in the wilderness. And now I beseech thee, let the power of my Lord be great, according as thou hast spoken, saying, the Lord is long-suffering, of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children under the third and fourth generation. Moses goes on in verse 19, pardon, I beseech thee, the iniquity of this people, according unto the greatness of thy mercy, and as thou hast forgiven this people from Egypt, even until now. It's just wonderful, and you can feel there had to be a part of Moses, and maybe there wasn't, maybe this is just my thinking, my earthly thinking, that's thinking, yeah, go ahead. You're going to keep me around and give me a new people? Maybe they'll listen, maybe they'll obey. There had to be, right? It's our deep inside all of us that had to thought of it for a second, unless that's just me thinking that way. I don't know. But here he goes before God and asks for pardon. And you can imagine, it doesn't say it, but I'm sure, besides being prostrate, he had to be full of emotion and tears, didn't he? That's a powerful prayer. Just think of times in your lives, brothers and sisters and friends, when you've been in anguish. You think of Jesus, the anguish of Jesus. Moses had to be in anguish over this. It wasn't just something, he just stood up and said, God, please pardon. He was in anguish. And I had to imagine this was a long, drawn-out thing. It wasn't a quick 2-minute prayer. It had to be long, drawn out. So when you read, these are things you use, as much as we read, you use our brains as visuals and try to picture the setting, and you really can feel the emotion of what's going on. God wanted to wipe them out. And Moses interceded. But we know that there would be punishment. And in verse 22, God says, well, first of all, in verse 20, God says, I have pardoned according to thy word. That's powerful. The creator of all things have pardoned because of the words and the prayer of a man. That's powerful stuff. But in verse 22, because all those men which have seen my glory and my mercies and my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, have tempted me now 10 times, have not hardened to my voice, surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers. And then if we skip over to verse 27, God continues about that, he goes into their carcasses will fall in the wilderness and so on and so forth. So that generation will spend the next 40 years wandering in the wilderness. And then in verse 36, God says, the men which Moses sent, the other 10 that were sent, I think it's verse 36. Yeah. And the men which Moses sent to search the land, who returned and made all the congregation to murmur against him by bringing up a slander upon the land. Even those men that did bring up the evil report upon the land died by the plague before the Lord. All right? Incorrect visions lead to an incorrect spirit, which in this case led to death. Same choice we have today. The world Butch brings up in his classes many a times. You have a choice, life or death. And unfortunately, the vision of these people was incorrect. They failed the test, and they did not have faith in God. Interesting verses. I was looking at this last night, and it's very interesting. And I want to read these verses from Proverbs and think of Caleb and Joshua as I read them, okay? So this is from Proverbs 24, verse 17. Rejoice not when thine enemy faileth. Let not thine heart be glad when he stumbleth, lest the Lord see it and it displease him, and he turn away his wrath from him. And I bring that up because, like Moses, I'm thinking somewhere deep in the recesses of their minds and their hearts, Joshua and Caleb had to be saying, you got what you deserved, to the 10. Now, the 10 weren't enemies. I'm not saying they were enemies, but they were adversaries. They were going against the word of Joshua and Caleb. So they were technically adversaries. So somewhere deep in their hearts, and again, maybe this is my human thinking, they had to be thinking, you got what you deserved. But we don't read that here. There was no gloating. There was no, see, we were right, you were wrong, ha ha ha. Remember that verse. It's a lesson for us, isn't it? We're in no position to be happy or gloat, and I've done it. I remember the one fight I've ever gotten into in high school. We were in the principal's office. Principal looked at me. He says, I don't know you. And I said, well, that's probably a good thing. And he says, you're Hampton, right? I said, yep. Football? Yep. Straight A student? Pretty close. Go back to your class. The other guy got 5-day suspension. I laughed. I was so happy. Now, of course, then I was 16, 17 years old, but you grow over time and, you know better. But so that's I had to think Joshua and Caleb kind of felt that way, right? Deep inside, yeah, maybe they wanted to gloat a little bit. They're human, but we don't read any of that. So they didn't. I just think that's an impressive thing and a good lesson for us. So let's look real quick about a correct vision. The vision that we look for. We look unto Christ, the author and finisher of our faith. We go back in chapter 24 and chapter 14, and one of the beautiful things in Scripture, when you get into Revelation and you study Revelation and you look at it and you see how many times No matter what the events that are taking place, everything points to one thing: the kingdom, right? Everything starts with the kingdom, ends with the kingdom. And even in the midst of all of this, the frustration, anger of God, the sadness, the anger, all the emotions Moses must have had, Caleb and Joshua, God always leaves, and it's everywhere. It's all around us. Verse 21 of chapter 14. As truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. There it is again. Amidst all the chaos and the pain, the vision of the kingdom. It's going to happen. I just think that's where our vision is, right? No matter the pain and the chaos that's going on around us in our lives, what keeps us strong is this vision. And that's what kept Caleb strong, was this vision. And we already read this verse in chapter 24 about another spirit for Caleb. In verse 30, God continues. He tells, you guys aren't going to see the promised land, but Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, there it is again, the Kenizzite, the Gentile, and Joshua, the son of Nun, they're going to see the land because they had faith in me and obeyed me. And another verse in verse 38 about the two of them seeing the land. And I put up a verse from Proverbs 3. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your understanding. Boy, does that fit the 10 perfectly, huh? They trusted in their own understanding. Joshua and Caleb did not. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. We do this every day, right? Lead me, Lord. Take me in your arms and guide me to where you want me to be. We have that mindset. All the craziness around us is kind of blocked out, isn't it, when we feel that way? And we don't feel this way all the time. I know I don't. There are times I feel myself being tossed in a boat to and fro, not feeling I'm on the path. I'm just floating around. But boy, when you're on that path and you trust in God, you feel it. You just feel different. Nothing dissuades you from, there's no negativity. Everything's positive. And we have great examples in this ecclesia of people who are suffering things I can't imagine. But they're oh so positive because of the vision, because of this verse. Trust in the Lord. And that's what they do. Great examples for us. Brothers and sisters. And I had put 2 Corinthians up there. We walk by faith, not by sight. And I found this to just be a beautiful place to end with those who have a vision of God in their life and of his promises. From Deuteronomy 30. Now this is after the blessings and the cursings of Deuteronomy 28. You remember that chapter? Where the blessings take up, I think, 13 verses. The curses take up at least double, if not triple that. And then we get this beautiful, and I think of Caleb now. I never did before I did this study, but I think of him now whenever I read these words. And I think of us too, right? Because this applies to us. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. And God's pleading, choose life. It's here. I'm giving it to you. I've made these promises. I keep my promises. Please believe me that you may live, you and your descendants. Love the Lord your God, obey his voice, and to cling to him. For he is your life and the length of your days. And again, I think of so many people, brothers and sisters, that have lived this every day of their lives. My mom. My mom was a flawed woman. I know that. But in her last breath, don't be sad, Mark. I'll see you in the kingdom. John Claude, same thing. Many of us saw him in the hospital. And he said, I'll see you in the kingdom. And I pray for this, for me, when it's my time, if Jesus doesn't return, that I have this same kind of spirit. This is the spirit Caleb had. Joshua had. So many in the Bible had. You have. And this is what carries us through. Before I move to the next one, any questions? I'm going to start moving now because I've got a little bit to finish. And any thoughts? No? Okay. So the next phase I want to look at of Caleb is called a different majority. So we covered servant, we covered vision. Now we're going to look at a different majority. And I'm moving around in Numbers, but if you go back to Numbers 1, remember we read this earlier. The congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. That's a lot of crying. They wept that night. To me, they wept the entire night because of the report from the 10. And that's what it caused. And, the 10 were able to get, I don't know the percentage, but the majority of the crowd do agree with them. We can't do this. And that's, you see that today, don't you? How influences, and I'm not picking on the media, but the media influences a lot of people to think one way or the other. No matter what the facts are, the media, if the media presents it, it's true. That's just the way it is. And people can be influenced a lot by the majority. Getting back to my fight in high school, I wasn't a super popular guy. I was liked by a lot of people, but the majority of guys that were around during that fight were cheering for the other guy. And I don't know why. I never had anything to do with any, I thought I got along with them, but 2 or 3 people started, come on, Bob, beat him up, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, everyone was cheering for Bob. And I was like, wow, I thought I had a couple of friends here. I guess I don't. I did. I got one good shot right to the nose. I broke his nose. But I'll tell you, Butch, it was one of the hardest things to do. Because I played a little bit of sports, but you never want to get in a fight. I never wanted to get in a fight. But I got jumped. He was hitting me pretty good, and I didn't know what to do. Do I just take the beating? But it's my human will got in the way, and I saw one good shot, and I got it, and that was it. It's funny how they broke up the fight when I got my one good one in, but after 10 minutes of being beaten on, no one even thought about stepping in. But it's just the way it is. So, the majority, the crowd, and we have to be so careful of that in our walk, don't we? Letting the world and the majority of people out there and their influences affect us. But then I considered a couple of things. Did the crowd, did the 10, were they influenced at all by what Joshua and Caleb had to say? We're told, right, to search the scriptures. Brother Richard, I think, is famous when he's preaching the truth. Don't believe me, search the scriptures for yourself. Did the 10, did the crowd, did anyone think to look into it at all, or were they just so rabid that, the 10 have to be right because they're 10. And these 2 guys have to be incorrect, and that seems to be what happened. So they didn't even search it out for themselves. Brother Chris, how you doing, brother?
It kind of brings us to a verse that I always enjoyed during this section of history, and it's verse 9 in Numbers 14. And this is kind of what Caleb says, I think, just before they're ready to stone him. And he says that there'll be bread for us. And because that, I think, brought the whole issue to the forefront. Connecting it to the bread, like the manna that, God will take care of these people just as he's taking care of us every morning and providing us the manna. And it's not a matter of us, okay, but God will take care of this. And I think in their hearts, they were wrestling with that idea, but they weren't. To me, it's almost like a horse that is approaching the jump, and they just refuse to make the leap of faith. But an animal like that can get very violent. Okay, if you force it to make a leap, it's not willing to make. And so I think you're seeing that's Joshua's calling them to make that leap, and they're refusing at that point, and then turn to kill him. So.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Anyone else? Okay. And Brother Chris led into our next, but Caleb and Joshua, as we know, stood alone. And if we go to verse 6, Joshua stands up, Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them, and they rent their clothes, and they spake unto the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it is an exceeding good land. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which is flowing with milk and honey. Only rebel not ye against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us, as Brother Chris pointed out. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. The Lord is with us. Don't fear them. And as Brother Chris pointed out, the congregation prepares to stone them. So here are these two men standing alone. And one thing I find incredible that, and I have some examples, the apostles, after they had been beaten, they went out and they continued to preach. Matthew 5, blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you, falsely for my sake. But one thing, I just noticed this last night after going through my notes, and I added it in here in bold. Notice how Caleb and Joshua, their response is positive. They don't argue with the 10 or with the crowd, and they don't judge them. At least I don't see that in these words. I don't see any. They're just, God is for us. Come on, believe. You've seen everything. They don't judge. They don't get angry. They might have been angry. I'm sure they spoke loudly, but they didn't say your lack of faith. They didn't judge. They didn't. Do you see that in there? I didn't. They were positive. They exposed them, for not having, but they don't come out and say your lack of faith is going to. And that reminded me of somebody. Did it remind you of someone, Brother Jim Sullivan? Yes. Who, Brother Jim? Brother Jason. Well, you have a saying, I think, Brother Jim, referring to Jesus as he never judged the darkness. Is that true? That's right. Yeah, and that's what it made me think of with Caleb and Joshua. All right? They voiced their opinions. They were positive, but they didn't argue. They didn't judge. So,
what does that mean, not judging the darkness?
Brother Jim, yeah, I'm going to leave that to you, brother, because that was your class I quoted.
So the way light works is light shines. And when light shines, by the light shining, it exposes the darkness. It isn't that light judges the darkness. It simply shines, and the darkness is exposed by the light. That's really what that expression means. It's the same thing as Jesus saying, I came not to condemn, I came to save. But if you want to live in the darkness, then you step away from the light. The light doesn't kick you out. That's basically what that means.
Much better said, Brother Jim. Thanks.
Sure. And that does make us all think of Brother Jason, obviously.
Yes. All right. So another aspect of Caleb was he was of a different persuasion. Okay, and you may be thinking, what does that mean? Hopefully when we go through this part of our class, it'll make sense. So if you go back to Numbers, verse 34, God God's judgment on the people. After the number of the days in which he searched the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall ye bear your iniquities. In 40 years ye shall know my breach of promise. So for the 40 days that the spies searched out the land, the people were now going to be in the wilderness for that many years, 40 years. Caleb and Joshua didn't deserve this, did they? They didn't. And this, this brings me back to school, in high school. And again, I keep going back to school, but those are the, in class, and when the class starts getting rowdy, the teacher sometimes, instead of punishing those that deserve it, punishes the class. Like I remember really young when punishment would be, no recess today. We're not going outside. And I'd be like, I didn't do anything. Why am I being punished? Joshua and Caleb could have said the same thing, right? There's nothing in here that says they said that. They didn't complain. They didn't argue. They could have. They didn't. That's what I mean by persuasion. Right? They had a different quality amongst them that they accepted what God had planned, no matter what, if the effect was positive or negative to them. That's part of what it means. Whereas most of us would have been persuaded to get angry, we would have probably maybe gotten angry. I know I did. When we got punished as a group, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. I don't deserve this. I didn't do it. But, so, I have here in the notes, they weren't influenced or corrupted. And think of the 40 years, the complaining, the grumbling, the rebellion, the strife, the jealousy, all the things that went on during that time didn't affect these men. They came out the other side the same way they went in, didn't they? When Moses dies and Joshua is appointed the leader, in Joshua 1 and 2, you still see that same Joshua that we read here, and we see the same Caleb. They weren't affected by it. That would have affected a lot of people, I think. Me personally, it probably would have. Maybe over time the people's influences, their persuasion might have influenced me. I don't know. Didn't them. And I pray it wouldn't have affected me, but that's what the world has on us, right? The persuasion of the world is strong. And that's what we all fight against every day, what Caleb and Joshua faced in the wilderness. I put it easy. We mentioned the Kenizzites were blended. They were a group of people who easily blended into different groups, right? And I don't mean to use the name Kenizzite in a defaming way. I hope it doesn't come across that way. But if we're not careful, we can kind of become like that. We can find ourselves, we come to church every Sunday and we do this and we do that and we think we're good, but the world is still there. Part of our body and our old man wants to be part of that, and we kind of mold into things, worldly things, saying it's okay, it's all right, I'm good. You blend in. You got to, and I know we do, but we need to be mindful of that every day in our lives. I put a quote: "Be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord," and that's what Joshua and Caleb did. To come out on the other side as strong, or if not stronger, because all of these things that happened probably strengthened them immensely for the work that lied ahead. So they had a different persuasion. And this is one of my favorite parts, and I'm sorry, we're going to have to go through it quickly, but if you go to Joshua chapter 14, this part is called Caleb Had a Different Energy. And this is something that, you might not think of until you read these verses. So if you go to Joshua 14, verse 6, Caleb asked Joshua for his inheritance. All right, we won't read the chapters just because of time. But he asked for his inheritance, and he says this down in verse 10. Behold, the Lord hath kept me alive, as he said, these 40 and 5 years, even since the Lord spake this word unto Moses. The vision. The Lord told me I would inherit this land, and I know God keeps his promises. And he had this vision, and he kept it for 45 years. He had the vision. The children of Israel wandered in the wilderness, and now, lo, I am this day 85 years old, 85 years old. I am as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, even so is my strength now for war, both to go out and to come in. Now, I know it totally sounds like physical strength, and he definitely is speaking of physical strength, but I think he's speaking more than just physical. I'm as strong now in my faith than I was when we started this wandering. I think that's what he's saying. 85 years old. Now, I know in those days that probably wasn't what 85 is today. He was as strong then as he was now. He's speaking physically, but he's speaking spiritually. That's a great example for us. And we see that all around us. You know, this wonderful family of people. I think of Sister Norma. My dad, Sharon, everybody. We're getting older. We are. But our faith is as strong now, if not stronger, than it was when we were baptized. And that's great examples for the younger people. It's a great example for me. You know? And that's what Caleb had. Caleb had this different type of energy about him. You know? And he wasn't worried about his age. He wasn't worried about what he physically could or couldn't do, even though he said he was as strong now, because he knew God was on his side, just like David and Goliath. You know, David knew he couldn't on his own beat Goliath, but with God, no problem. That's what Caleb had. He had a different energy. Remember people growing up, you know? I played sports, and there were certain guys that had enough energy to get by, but there were some with super energy. Energy is infectious, isn't it? If you work with people with no energy and just go each day, punch the clock, and go home, all right, you might get some stuff done, but I like to work with people with energy. My bosses have energy, and that's infectious. Your energy is infectious to me, and I hope that mine's infectious on you. That's, as a brotherhood, brothers and sisters, as an ecclesia, that's what we need to do, our energy. No matter what our situation, we need to keep our energy up, and that's what Caleb and Joshua were able to do. I put these here, and again, I'm going to go speed up a little bit. Our physical bodies may age and slow down, but our spirit and zest for the truth, our vision doesn't have to. And again, I keep repeating it, but the amount of examples that we see in our family and our family worldwide speaks to that. And I put some verses up there that you can look at on your own. And that's our end goal, isn't it? You know, we're running a race and climbing up the mountain, and as we know, Caleb was able to take the mountain with the Lord's help. And he won his vision. And we can win ours too. So just to recap, and we got 2 minutes left, and this is perfect. I thank you all for your attention. So Caleb, a man with another or a different spirit, what made him different? He was a different servant. He had a different vision. And I think out of all of them, to me, this is the most important. You know, he compared the problem with God's promises and not to his own abilities. And a verse we know very well, if God be for us, who can be against us, right? He had a different majority. He stood alone. You know, I know Joshua was there, but, you know, standing alone can be hard. But he had the truth, he had faith, and he had the courage to do it. He had a different persuasion. He wasn't affected by those around him, those who doubted. 40 years in the wilderness, it didn't affect him. He came out stronger on the other side. And he had a different type of energy. He was eager. He was a dog, right? He was always on the move. He was always ready to serve. And always remember that it's God's strength that carried him and not his own. And again, he conquered the mountain. So in closing, be strong and let your heart be courageous, all you who put your hope in the Lord. From Psalm 31:24. And we'll close there. Any thoughts, questions, comments, anything? Yes. Oh, you want me to go back? Yes.